Welcome to Norton's Focus on Norton, brought to you by the GOP, the Town Committee here in Norton. And tonight we're honored by having as our special guest Senator Paul Feeney. And before we start the program, would you all rise and pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Take this moment to just silence your phones. Appreciate that. Having a senator speak to us is a first, but we're looking forward to his position and his vision of some of the topics that he will be talking about. He has a very strong resume, which I would like to take the moment, because I've never seen one this strong, and I'm serious when I say that. State Senator of Bristol and Norfolk County from 2017 to the present. Chair of the Foxborough Board of Selectmen, 2009 and 10. Member of the Foxborough Board of Selectmen, 2007-2010. Chief of Staff, Massachusetts State Senator, 2005-6. Some of the committee assignments that he has held and presently holds: Chairperson of the Joint Committee on Financial Services, Vice Chair of the Senate Committee on Post Audit and Oversight, Senate Committee on Personnel and Administration, Senate Committee on Ways and Means, Joint Committee on Health Care and Financing, Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development, and his cities include Attleboro, Mansfield, North Attleboro, Norton in the county of Bristol, and in Norfolk, it's Canton, Foxborough, and Sharon. It is with pleasure that I introduce to you the Senator, as mentioned, and the floor is now his. Senator Paul Feeney, please.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ralph. Good evening, everybody. It's great to see everybody and to be here with my colleague, my partner in crime in the state legislature, Representative Jay Barrows, who represents Norton, as well as Representative Stephen Howitt. Jay and I also share the communities of Foxborough and Mansfield as well. So it's great to be here with you all. And I want to thank the Town Republican Committee for offering this service to the people of Norton. It's a big deal for people to be informed and to have folks come through and kind of talk casually, right? Not to do these big formal events throughout the district, but to actually come and have a conversation, kind of give a little bit of a highlight on some of the things that are happening up in Beacon Hill, and then obviously would love to open up to any questions and conversation. It means a lot to me as I travel around the district to talk to people and get the finger on the pulse. Not every community is the same. Ralph, as you mentioned, the district, the Bristol and Norfolk district, is pretty unique. There are 40 state senators in Massachusetts. Each one of us represent pretty close to the same amount of constituents, about 180,000. Throughout our districts, my district has 7 communities, from Canton in the north to North Attleboro and Attleboro in the south, and of course Norton, kind of right here in the heart of the district. But when you think about a district like that, you see very diverse demographics when it comes to socioeconomic status, when it comes to the needs of each community. You know, there's certainly a common thread, and I'll get into those in a few moments, with 351 cities and towns throughout Massachusetts. But really, when you look at it, each town, and Representative Barrows can attest to this, each city and town is very different when it comes to their needs from the state. There are the basics that I'll talk about: budget, school funding, transportation funding, and things like that. But then each community is unique, and we can get into kind of some of those things that we're working on here in Norton that are special to this community. Real quick, kind of on background, I know pretty much all of you here. For those of you that don't know me, I've represented this district since 2017. I won in a special election for the state senate. I'm blessed to be here. Never thought that I would be in the state senate. I took a little bit of a different path, I think, to the legislature. I'm not one of those Harvard guys that you see my chamber filled with. I'm not an attorney, not a business owner. I was a blue-collar telephone worker. I was a phone worker by trade for over 20 years. I grew up in the city of Boston, in Jamaica Plain, Rosendale area, and wasn't the best student when I went to Don Bosco High School. I barely graduated by the skin of my teeth from Don Bosco. And when I got out, I had my heart set on going to college. My dad, who was a telephone worker at the time, him and my mom had some financial difficulties when I was growing up. My parents thought it was a great idea back when I was in middle school to take me out of the city and to move out to Auburn, Mass, which, if anybody's familiar with Auburn out in central Mass, just south of Worcester, it is culture shock, to say the least, for a kid from Forest Hills in Jamaica Plain. But they had purchased their first home. My dad was working in Southborough, and it was their little piece of the American dream. They saved their money. I can remember my dad working on that house day in and day out. He just did so much work, built the upstairs, built out the basement, spent all his time and money on that house. They just had my younger brother. I was an only child until about 11 years old, and then he came along. I love him to death. I was with them yesterday for the Super Bowl, but again, they had him, and he had some health issues. And I can remember my family going back and forth to Boston every day with my younger brother. That same year, my dad was at the telephone company. If you remember, back in 1989, there was this big strike, 17 weeks. He was out on strike. Gas company went out that year, phone company. So they were going through that. They buy this house. They have a newborn and a middle schooler, and they got a letter from the town. We had private well water in Auburn. And they told us to immediately cease and desist drinking or bathing in our water. They said, don't drink it, limit your skin exposure to 5 minutes per day or whatever it was. And my family was devastated. What do? We got 2 young kids, house that we put our entire life savings into. How do we handle this? Turns out there was a truck stop behind us that was knowingly dumping engine cleaning solvents into a cracked storage container underground. And that, amongst other things, they used to call it, I think, gas station mile. It was right out in Route 12 and 20 in Auburn. So the entire water table of my neighborhood was contaminated with carcinogens and all sorts of terrible, terrible chemicals in our well water. So my parents were faced with this choice. They had very limited money at that time to strike, my brother, and now they had a house that they couldn't sell. We couldn't drink the water. So they struggled. They organized the neighborhood. That part of town kind of came together to try and fight for public drinking water in that neighborhood. The short of the story is they ended up getting public drinking water into that neighborhood until they were able to get it cleaned up, but not before my parents actually lost our home. Luckily, we had family members back in Boston that had friends that were able to give us an affordable place to live back in the neighborhood that I grew up in. But it was devastating for my family to see my dad go through. I remember my dad going to actually both my parents they went to a select board meeting, and a couple of the select board members were great. And they said to my family and others like it, want to do what we can to help you. Then there was a few that just said, you know what, not our problem, figure it out. And I remember my dad was this big guy, he was active. I remember seeing tears in his eyes because, again, he had a family, he didn't know what to do. So he went and organized the neighborhood. But again, it was a struggle. So here I find myself getting out of high school. I went to a private college prep / vocational technical high school and took electricity, and I was going to go change the world when I get out. And I said, I'm going to go to Mass Maritime. I'm going to go work on ships. I'm going to travel the world. It's going to be great. And state school, reasonable tuition at the time with all the added fees. I can remember sitting down with my dad that summer, and he said, kid, I love you. But even with what it is, we just don't have it to send you to school. You know, I think maybe you should think about going to work. And, my dad and mom gave us everything we ever needed. So I was in no position to complain and said, no problem, I'll figure it out. So I went to work for the phone company, same building he was at in Southborough. Started driving a truck on the overnight shift, 10 at night, 6 in the morning, driving to Connecticut, dropping off tools, mail, equipment, all that sort of stuff. And that was my career. That's where I was going to be. Got involved with some of my coworkers working on legislation that affected certainly our sector. Started getting involved in politics. Growing up in Boston, it's like you have to be involved in politics. You had the old ward bosses that if you weren't doing the right thing, they would make you do it. So I found that was kind of my niche. I took the exams, I studied, I get into a technician job in Boston, and I was there again for over 20 years until I get this crazy idea to run for state senate. So again, kind of a different path to the Senate than most of my colleagues. But when I ran, I said, I kind of imposter syndrome, and you start thinking, who am I, right? Why should I be running for state senate? This is crazy. I had worked for my predecessor for a year. I took a leave of absence to be his chief of staff, so I knew about the job, and I knew the district, but didn't know if it was necessarily for me. And then I served in local office and kind of saw what it meant when the state made decisions, what it meant to our community, and how we had to deal with things, especially back just as we were about to hit the skids on the economy and go into a recession. So I lived that. I saw what it meant to a community, and I said, what a hypocrite I'd be when I'm telling everybody else my feelings and my opinions on everything else in the state, including Rep. Barrows, who I'd call up, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. What a hypocrite if I don't put my name on a ballot and actually run. Phone started ringing, you thinking about running for Senate? I'm with you. I said, all right, let's give it a shot. But I knew that in order to be effective, I had to listen to the words of my mentors for so many years. One of them lived right here in Norton and passed away a couple of years ago. And Fitzy, God love him, I went to him early on. I said, Fitz, I'm going to run for state senate. He said, you should get your head checked. And I said, yeah, but what do you think? And he goes, I said, I don't know. I don't know every Mass General law. I don't know the statutes. And he said, Feeney, listen, it's not just about your ability or your inability. It's about your availability and accessibility. Show up, be there, talk to people, learn, be yourself. I had run for state representative many, many years ago. Jay will remember, and I was 27, 28 years old. And when you first run for office, people tell you, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. You gotta say this, you gotta look like this, you gotta do that. And frankly, I got smoked in the primary, and that was fine. That was a good lesson to me. I think you learn more in a loss sometimes than you do in a win. But I remember after that election doing a little bit of self-reflection and said, man, it just wasn't comfortable. And my wife, who I affectionately call Saint Laura because she deals with me on a daily basis, Laura said to me, if you ever do this again, first of all, ask. Second of all, just be you, just be yourself. And I thought that was kind of the secret sauce, right? That was, people crave authenticity in their local elected officials. People crave authenticity in their state and federal elected officials. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it my way, I'm going to be me. And I've been blessed ever since that election to be able to represent this district. I served the same way that I ran. That I'm always available, I'm always accessible. I try and be out in the community. This is my job. This is what I do full time. Try and be out talking to people, get the sense of where folks are in the district, and have those two-way conversations. As elected officials, we're called to represent. We're also called to lead, right? We are we're empowered by people in our communities to vote and to use our conscience when we are doing the work of the people. So that's been a big part of kind of the way I serve, and I say this not just because he's here, honestly. Representative Barrows has been somebody that I've looked up to since I got elected into the job. And trust me, we battle on issues. I'm a Democrat, he's a Republican. There are certain things that come up that Jay just shakes his head at me, and I do the same thing to him, and I said, I'll never see it your way, I don't know what you're thinking, and vice versa. But what we have special here in Norton, and really throughout my entire district, None of that matters. On the state level, we had a school group in the State House last week, and they were asking, about the interaction, and we both said, this isn't DC. This isn't Washington. And I say that not to be flip, but seriously, like we actually talk to each other on a daily basis some days, some weeks. And we talk about the local issues, and politics doesn't enter into it. There are times when, we'll be talking about certain votes up at the State House, and, my Republican colleagues, my Democratic colleagues, even with some of my Democratic colleagues, I don't agree, and we'll go back and forth. But when it comes to representing the district, which is the bread and butter of this job, there's no place for that. And again, I know that sounds cliche. You're probably going to get every elected official that ever got elected come up and say the same thing. But the proof is in the way that we serve and the way that I serve. We've been able to get a lot done in this district because of those conversations. I wish we could get more done. It does get frustrating. We do bang our heads against the wall sometimes because I'm one of 40. Our representatives are one of 160. We try and get to a place where we are lifting up the voices of this district and our communities. But it's tough. It's tough in a legislature when you have, 200 different people with their own frame of reference trying to push their own agenda from their district and from their personal opinions. So the way I serve is to try and kind of be a bridge builder, bring people together, talk about these issues. We have some complicated, challenging issues facing the state and facing the district. Anything that happens up at the Massachusetts State House filters down. See, our select board members that are here know that. It filters down, and I saw that when I was on the Board of Selectmen as well in Foxborough. Those decisions you can't make lightly, because even when you don't think that there's a direct connection, I guarantee you'll find out 6 months down the road, a year down the road, a couple of years down the road, it affects your district and your communities. So, you try and be studious, you try and figure out what are all the different angles in legislation or appropriation bills, and get to a place where you're adequately representing the district. Now, we're in a tough spot right now in Massachusetts. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was kind of the shift that we're seeing in revenue, because it's going to affect the community in Norton, it's going to affect our district. For the last few years, you've probably heard all about the state surpluses, supplemental budgets, stabilization fund that we've been building up. We have really been living pretty high in Massachusetts, and that's not just our state, that's across the country. Now all of a sudden we're starting to come back down to earth. And since the day that I served, we have been flush with resources. Always going to make a decision based on priorities, and not everybody gets everything. But we really haven't been in a position since I started in 2017 to say, hey, hit the brakes a little bit. What we did in those years is to try and budget conservatively, knowing that the bottom may fall out someday, or like what we're seeing now, we may start to slow down a little bit. The last few years since COVID, we have seen an influx of federal funding. We know that the ARPA funding, infrastructure money, everything that's been coming from the federal government, just flooding municipalities, counties, states, businesses, workers. All of that money, all of that revenue has filtered down into our tax receipts at some point, right? Even if it's not direct, even if the town of Norton doesn't get X amount of millions of dollars directly from the federal government, or Massachusetts doesn't get it directly from the federal government, if it's going to a business that's putting people to work, or that's going out and actually building things or manufacturing, that ends up in the state coffers, right? It ends up through our sales tax, through our income tax withholdings. It ends up in the state coffers. So we've seen growth over the last few years. I think we've been budgeting 7% growth almost, or more than that for a couple of years. Everybody get used to that. What we did, I think, smartly, our leadership in the House and Senate, the minority party in the House and Senate, Ways and Means, made sure that a significant portion of that money that we were collecting through our state receipts was going into our stabilization fund, or our rainy day fund, which you may refer to it as. We are at a record level for our stabilization fund. It's over $8 billion right now, which all of the rating agencies love, because they always tell you want to have at least 10% in there in case the bottom falls out. And, we are in good shape when it comes to that. That's through careful budgeting. We've also made sure that any additional funding that was one-time money, we were spending on capital projects so that we weren't actually increasing the operational costs of a lot of different departments and agencies, because once that money dries up, then you have to figure out a way to fund it, right? Or you're making dramatic cuts. So we've done that over the last few years. But still, at 7% growth, we've spent a lot of money that now all of a sudden we have to realize it's not coming anymore. This year, I think we were looking at 2.9% growth in the governor's proposed budget. Probably going to be similar in the House and the Senate, you know, maybe 0.8, 0.9, maybe, you know, up or down 1 or 2 tenths of a percentage point. That is significant. And I say that because we're not entering into a recession where, you know, all of a sudden, hey, listen, we are down, we're going to have to start making cuts left and right. We're in a position, though, where we got to be realistic and say, you know, we're back to normal, slow down, 2.9% growth. It's going to cause some pain. There are some folks that, you know, expect to be living like we have the last few years. It's just not going to happen. So the governor comes out with her budget just in the last few weeks, actually, in January, end of January. It's called H2. She comes out with her budget. House and the Senate and Administration of Finance, the governor, administration all agree. This is what we think we're going to get for revenue in FY25. Let's budget for that. So, you know, by Constitution here in Massachusetts, we have to have a balanced budget. We're not like the federal government. We have to balance it. So governor agrees. She builds her budget. Then it goes to the House in April and then to us in the Senate in May. And we'll come up with a final budget for FY25. Reason why I give a little bit of the civics lesson on that in the process is twofold. Number one, the governor's budget comes out, like I said, in January. We build that off a consensus revenue number that we think is going to be the revenue coming into Massachusetts for FY25. That sometimes changes over those few months until it makes it to the House and the Senate, and even changes after we adopt the final budget, and you know we go through a conference committee and it goes to the governor. So things could change, right? Second reason why I bring that up is because it affects a town like Norton, who right now is putting together your budget. You got to go to town meeting in the spring for a budget based on what you think the state is going to be sending down from Beacon Hill. So communities like Norton have to base that off of a draft budget done in January, knowing that it could change in April, knowing that it could change in May in the Senate, knowing that it could change in a final conference committee report before it then goes back to the governor. Then she has the opportunity to veto things or make amendments. So oftentimes, a community like Norton's not actually finding out what you're going to get from the state as the final number until you're well into your fiscal year. That's a problem when it comes to timing. Not a problem when we're flush with cash and we can say, look, just count on it, you know, you'll be okay. But when we're in a position like we are now, with modest growth, you got to be careful. The margins are very, very small when it comes to putting together a school budget, when it comes to putting together a municipal budget. So my message has been to the communities, town managers, select boards, mayors, city councilors, look at level funding, figure on level funding. If we come in over the top in the House in the spring or in the Senate later on, great. And you'll get more than what you expected, but expect it to be pretty close to level. There are different formulas involved. And again, I know people at home, their eyes are probably glazing over because it gets to be really kind of just boring, monotonous stuff. But there is a lot that we do that's formulaic. Representative Barrows and I can't go and advocate for more money for a certain budget item because there is no leeway. It's based on formula, right? When you look at school funding, it's based on a formula. When you look at transportation, Chapter 90 funding, it's based on a formula. So there is very little we can do to affect that formula on a year-to-year basis. Now we can certainly, and we've been talking about this, part of our job is to figure out kind of long-term, how do we adjust those formulas, like when we did the Student Opportunity Act a couple of years ago. Student Opportunity Act is a great piece of legislation in concept. We needed to triage the most emergent communities, the most emergent needs in our communities. Well, that happened to be many of the low-income communities, many places where diversity, English language learners were at such a level that we just had to bring them up to catch up. Doesn't do a heck of a lot for a town like Norton. Doesn't do a heck of a lot for most of the towns in my district. Even in a gateway city like Attleboro. Attleboro is struggling upside down on that budget because they're not getting what they should be getting from the state. Again, that's not a year-to-year issue for us, where I can go in and just, file an amendment, raise my hand, and get that increase. But long-term, these are the conversations that we need to have, and something that I'm committed to is to say, let's look at these communities. It is not sustainable to give increases to the town in Norton that barely, and this is Dr. Baetta used to tell me this, he'd call us up, Jay and I up late at night and say, your increase for our schools this year won't cover my toilet paper, my janitorial supplies increase because of inflation at Norton schools. How do I defend that, right? There's something wrong with the formula when that's the case. Not every town's the same. There's no cookie cutter approach you can take to this. So we really got to be thoughtful about this in the years ahead, and something, God willing, if I am back in the Senate, that we're going to continue to work on. So the budget this year estimates a certain consensus revenue. Take us back a year ago, we did the same thing. Consensus revenue figure, Senate, House, Administration, Governor, they all agree. So we set our projections. These are our benchmarks. This is what we think we're going to get. And we don't do it alone, trust me. As I said, I took electricity in high school. I'm certainly not an economist, so I'm smart enough to bring in the right people. And as a member of Ways and Means, I have access to some of the smartest economists in the world who come in and tell us, this is what you should expect. This is what we're going to see for sales taxes, we're going to see for withholdings, this is what we're going to see for X, Y, Z, and they go through all the different buckets. So those are the numbers we use. Well, picture we have all these projections for this fiscal year, FY24, and all of a sudden, back in the fall, I think was probably the first time we came in under it, each month, as revenue figures were coming in, we were coming in under those projections. So it happens for 1 month, you say, all right, who knows what happened, maybe there was a dip for whatever reason. 2 months, all right, now we're starting to see something's going on. 3 months, now it's a trend. Now we're at the point where this past month, even with revised revenue figures that came down from our original benchmark, we still came in under that. So we are in a position now where in FY24, just months away from the close of our fiscal year, the governor was forced to make cuts. I think she was the third governor in a row that had to do that. Charlie Baker had to do it, Deval Patrick had to do it, and now Maura Healey, where she has to actually look and say, hey, by law, I have to have a balanced budget. We can't deficit spend. We need to make some cuts. Those cuts under state law, it's called 9C, it's section 9C, where she has the authority to do that without the legislature having any input into that. It's painful. I'll tell you it's painful because we have many earmarks, and I know earmarks sometimes get a dirty, it's like a dirty word. They get a negative connotation, but for us, as legislators of this district, I like to call it priority spending, not earmarks, so change the term on it. Because the idea is that us as legislators in the district, meeting with people around this town, we know where the money needs to be spent, right? A lot more than a colleague that I have in Pittsfield or somebody else. So they give us an opportunity to kind of look at where we can do that. Many of the earmarks that we got passed as a delegation in Norton and throughout the district were actually cut by 50%. That's painful, especially when you see some of the organizations and others that were counting on that money. But it's the governor's obligation, and she has to do it. She did it. Revise the numbers down. But I bring it up here because as we're standing here, I would not be surprised, and this was not certainly not confirmed, and there's no inside info. But if we continue on this trend for the last few months of this fiscal year, I would not be shocked if there are more cuts to come. It's just simple math. Simple math. And we're coming in so far under our revised projections that I think we may end up upside down unless we do that. That affects a town like Norton. Like I mentioned, earmarks, that we had secured an earmark to help with pavement up at the library, right? Something the town said, hey, if you got any discretionary spending available, can you help us out with this, right? It's not, when you look at the scope of what we're doing in a multi-billion-dollar budget, it's not a lot of money, but it will help us in Norton to be able to pave this and not worry about putting it on our rolls here in Norton. You know, spending like that was cut. I think of some nonprofits in the area that myself and the representative and other members of the delegation wanted to try and help out for a lot of different reasons. They do a lot of good work. Those funds were slashed in half. So we're in a different situation now than we were in the last few years. The only reason why I bring it up is because I think it does, number one, people should know that. And number two, I think it could have an adverse effect in our community going forward. So we look at what we've done over the last couple of years. We saw last year, if everybody remembers that 62F, you picked up the newspaper, you saw in the news, there was this little known clause. I certainly didn't know about it. Representative, I know it's been on the books for a long time, but I don't think any of us ever really talked about it, that kind of triggered. So if collections come in over a certain amount, we are obligated, based on a referendum that passed back in the 80s, to give money back to taxpayers, right? Simple concept. It got triggered. We had all this money coming into the state, so we had to give that money back. Discussions then ensued and said, well, wait a minute. If we are collecting so much revenue that we actually have to trigger this law from the 80s and give money back to people, then why don't we just change the structure to actually finally do tax reform so that we're not collecting all of that money? It belongs to we're not a bank, right? It belongs to the people and the taxpayers. So we did that. Last year, we engaged in tax reform discussions. There were some differences between the House and the Senate. But we finally got to a place where we were able to do meaningful tax reform. I'll tell you how I gauged it. About a third of the people that reached out to me said, you're not doing enough, you gotta do more. Another third said, this is way too much, you're giving way too much to people. And then about a third said, yeah, I think this is right size. It's a good balance, right? $500 million, I think you're in good shape. So I said, all right, if we're making everybody upset, then we're probably doing the right thing. But that was an important conversation. We haven't done tax reform discussions like that in many, many years. And we did it to try and, I was joking with my staff, we're going to sprinkle the infield, right? Some high income earners, there's low income earners, but then there's that, what I always call the missing middle, right? Those middle class taxpayers and people in our communities that they make too much income, they have too many assets to qualify for a lot of the programs that low income earners are able to get. They're not high income earners and independently wealthy, so it's not, they can't just say, oh, it's all right, I'll write it off this year. There is a significant group in the middle that's just getting squeezed. Again, it sounds cliche, but having grown up in that, having seen that, having worked with all my colleagues I worked for over 20 years in the private sector, that was us. We were in that middle. We're struggling. So I tend to focus on kind of that group. So it was important that we took the steps that we did on that tax reform package. Now, going forward, I think we should entertain doing more of that. Don't think that the right time to do that is when everything's so volatile and you're in kind of this point where we don't know what it's going to look like for the next fiscal year, never mind the next 2 or 3. But it is something that I'm certainly committed to, and I know the delegation here in Norton and throughout our district is definitely committed to. Right-sizing that budget again. Increasing the stabilization fund, saving for a rainy day, making sure that we're not squirreling away money, and making sure that we're not spending like drunken sailors throughout Massachusetts, but really figuring out what are our needs, cover those needs, and then take care of people and the taxpayers that are actually funding all of that. So that's kind of the big picture that we're looking at now. We are in the process of building out that budget. We are having Ways and Means hearing. I'm actually chairing one in this area down at Bristol Aggie in a couple of weeks. So it'll be a Ways and Means hearing. People can come in, they can view it. It's open to the public. We're going to focus on certain areas of government that day. We're going to focus on the environmental agencies. We're going to focus on transportation. We're going to focus on the agriculture departments in the state. But those hearings are happening. They're happening throughout the state over the next couple months, and I would encourage people, if you get the opportunity, to go onto the Mass Legislature and watch that. Watch the governor's team and the different agencies come in and say, these are our needs, this is why we need X, Y, Z. Just like what happens here in Norton when the fire department comes and says, this is our needs, when the police department, when the schools come, DPW. We do the same thing on a state level, and I think it's very informative for people to watch. Even if you want to just watch the video at night when you're trying to fall asleep, it's very interesting stuff for nerds like me, but I think for a lot of other people to understand where their money is being spent. So focusing on the budget, challenges ahead. The other part of our job, and again, I said there's kind of different buckets of what I do. The bread and butter of it being constituent services and serving our communities. It's one of those things that I pride myself on in my office of being responsive to people. I know Representative Barrows, Representative Howard do the same. When people call, you want to be able to serve. And trust me, they call or they email. I think we're up to probably 300-400 emails a day from people on all different stuff. Some of those emails that come through, you'll see them, I need help, I need assistance, I'm asking for assistance. I have a full staff. I'm blessed to have some great, especially great young people working for me. One of them is here tonight, Bill, who's my district director, and he'll tell you that we get calls from people that need help from housing, they need help for health care, they need help on unemployment, especially during COVID, forget about it, when everybody was unemployed for the first time. I get a call from a gentleman in Norton who was 75, 76 years old, and he said to me, Senator, I never even thought I could call you on this. He goes, I'm still working, and for the first time in my life, I'm collecting unemployment. I have no idea what the hell I'm supposed to do. How do I do this? How do I get this right? I'm trying to, still take care of things. I got bills to pay. He had tears in his eyes when he called. I could hear him, and I said, I'm sorry you're dealing with this. And he said, no, you kidding me? I'm blessed. He goes, I just don't know how to do what I'm supposed to do here. And, to try and tell somebody who first time ever collecting unemployment, who's working with his hands his whole life, all right, I need you to log into the state website portal, and I need you to fill out this form and send this. And it was, so we had our staff would literally go to people's homes, meet them in libraries, meet them in our office, help them go through it, take pictures of their license to send over for proof of identification, and it was involved. But when people call, you want to be able to serve them. We can't fix everything. I tell people I don't have a magic wand. I'm not the governor. I can't say do this or do that. But I always joke that we're professional agitators. We shake the trees and try and help people when they call. Again, not perfect, but we try. People have issues with the registry, they call my office, they call the representative's office. We work together saying, hey, we got this case, can you call this agency, I'll call this one, and let's kind of double up to try and get something done. So that's a big part of what we do, is assisting constituents. And I gotta be honest, there are many constituents that call, and I'll tell you, they say, I never even thought to call my senator's office. And then I heard from a friend who said that they had got help from you, so I figured I'd give you a buzz. That to me is what the job should be. I remember growing up watching guys like Congressman Joe Moakley, right? Joe Moakley was, just served his constituents better than anybody across the country. That sort of thing, I think, is what people expect of us, and we try and meet that expectation. So you get that piece of what we do, and then the third piece is legislation. Right? We are elected legislators. Our job is to work on legislation, pass bills, don't pass bills, put things through committee, kill things in committee. It is our job to vet over 7,000 pieces of legislation that get filed every year. 7,000. Only a couple hundred actually will ever make it to the floor. And a lot of those are just local issues. But when you think about 7,000 bills filed by people from all over the state, different parts of the state, different unique needs, different constituencies, different frames of reference, different backgrounds, you quickly understand, how many things people need us to work on that we should be working on. But you can't do it all. So you got to break it down into priorities. I am blessed to have this job and to have a value system that I think is consistent with our district. It's important to me as we go through these bills that I always ask myself the question, what about your working person in Norton? What about the working person in Mansfield? What about the working person in Attleboro? How does this affect them? Now, to do this job effectively, you're then asking yourself the question, what about the small business in this community? What about the small business in Canton? What about the single mom in Foxborough? That is what we do. And to me, that is the part of the job that I think is the most impactful when it comes to, kind of the bigger picture items. Part of what we do with 7,000 bills filed is we break them up by topic and they get sent to committees. They go to that committee of jurisdiction, which is technically supposed to be that kind of expert for that subject matter, and have them go through it and vet it, figure out if it's ready for prime time, if it'll pass constitutional muster, and then move it along. I've been appointed this past session and half of the last session as the chair of the Joint Committee on Financial Services. Incredible committee. Representative Barros was the ranking member on that for many years. We deal with all banking issues, insurance issues, wealth management, and it's become kind of a catch-all as well. Transportation issues, Uber, Lyft, those types of things. So we have, I think, 400 bills that were filed this session. Our job, my job as the chair, is to go through each of those, make sure we have a public hearing. Every single bill filed in Massachusetts gets a public hearing. Means people can come in and weigh on it. People from Norton can come in to the State House and say, I saw this bill, it's important to me, and here's why, Feeney. Here's why I need you to pass this bill. Now, because of the way we've been doing it since COVID, they can actually go on and do it by Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever app we're using to go on there and say, hey, this is an important bill to me, I need you to pass it. As a chair, especially of the Joint Committee on Financial Services, which gets all of the insurance issues, right? And I'm talking, auto, life, property casualty, all that, but also the health insurance issues. I oftentimes sit at those public hearings saying to myself, my God, can we just do everything? Because the stories you hear from people that come in, the kids with the cleft palates and cleft lips, that say, we want to get this treatment, but we can't afford it and our insurance doesn't pay for it. An issue I'm dealing with now is sickle cell, where predominantly African-American community, Caribbean community, they come in and say, there hasn't been a lot, of effort to cover these things from our insurance companies. We're in the hospital constantly. And it kills you to see that. When you have people come in, women who are survivors of breast cancer, who say, not only did I have to fight a disease, but I had to figure out how I was going to pay for it. In the richest country in the history of civilization, you want to say, my God, what are we doing wrong? Right? What's broken here? But you can't do it all. You have to pick, which is brutal, but you have to pick based on, again, like I talked about earlier, triaging those most emergent needs, because you can't simply say, all right, we're going to take all these individual insurance mandates, put them onto our payers, put them onto the insurance companies, and then see premiums skyrocket more than they already are, right? Those are those balanced decisions that you need to make. That quite frankly, when I get elected to the job, I think a lot of people have this idea that you're going to be an advocate legislator. You're going to go in, you're going to bang the table, and you're going to, it's what you want to do. It's how we're wired as human beings, right? You want to fix things. The balance is, once you're there saying, man, how do I then go out and say we passed on all these individual mandates? By the way, you who can't afford health insurance for your employees, well, we just jacked up your prices. So you try and pick your spot and say, well, maybe there's another way. Can I work with the insurance companies to get creative? Can we look at their margins? Can we look at ways to be more efficient and save, but at the same time make sure that those savings are being passed on to people? So that when you do find yourself, you or a loved one, a family member, sick and needing that coverage, that you can have it. That you can fight a disease or you can get yourself well without having to worry about going broke doing it. We just put a bill out of our Committee on Financial Services recently on pregnancy costs. And I heard from some people that said, don't do it. If you're going to have children, you're going to have to bear the costs. But then when you look at, again, that missing middle, those working class people I was talking about, you realize so many people have high deductible plans nowadays, right? Especially younger folks. They have high deductible plans. Their choice, there's plenty on the market they can choose from. They go a high deductible plan so that's affordable for them. All of a sudden they're growing their family, A woman gets pregnant in, say, September, all that prenatal care, she's eating up in her deductible, so she's paying. Now it's January, what happens? Right? It flips, now she's gonna pay all the deductible again to have the child. So now you got families that are coming to us saying, Senator, it's costing me, I get a $2,500 deductible, I get a $5,000 deductible, whatever it may be. I'm paying for the entire pregnancy, the end of the year, beginning of the year. This is unaffordable. Should only independently wealthy people be able to go and grow their family? No, that's crazy. So we put a bill out of our committee recently that got some press, but honestly, we're going to be working with the providers especially, but also the payers, to figure out how do we do this so that people don't go into the poorhouse, right, when they're seeking medical care. So that committee, I will tell you, is fascinating. Dealing with all the banking issues, never thought that I would be learning as much as I am about wealth management, and a lot of the interplay between banks and credit unions and community banks and all of that. But it's important stuff. And again, I have these meetings, and you listen to people and you're educated, and 15 minutes later you say, oh my God, what did they just say again? So you have a follow-up meeting, you try and learn these things. But it affects people in our district. It affects people throughout Massachusetts. Especially now we're talking about crypto. Right? We're talking about people in crypto. We're talking about the democratization of finance. People have the Robinhood apps on their phones, right? And what that actually means are people making decisions on investing money by looking at whether or not it's green light, yellow light, or confetti pops up when they buy stock, right? These are the issues that we're dealing with, trying to make sure that we're protecting consumers in Massachusetts. Want you to be able to invest your money wherever you want to invest your money. That's your money. But at the same time, it's not like putting a bet, on a prop on Patrick Mahomes at the Super Bowl. You're investing money in commodities and stocks and shares. We're dealing with that in our committee. Fascinated by it. Also, in the last few weeks, I was appointed to a special committee on ballot initiatives. So everybody knows it's election year this year. We're going to start to see questions hit the ballot. Questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many there's going to be. And those questions, if you are like me, you pick up that red book that you get mailed to you and you go, wow, what is this about? And it's confusing. A lot of the times these questions are confusing. Very rarely is it, yes means this, easy, no means this, easy. A lot of the times it's pretty nuanced stuff. What we've found is that a lot of people don't appreciate those nuances. Why? Because they're not like me. They're not doing this full time. They're taking the kids to school in the morning. They're going to work all day. They're coming home, putting the truck in the garage, and they're watching Sports Center. And last thing they want to worry about is what question 3 is on the ballot in November. So a lot of what we do in the legislature, well, twofold. One, we try and understand it so that if there's legislation that we can actually pass to avoid a ballot question, then we want to do that. 2, we go out and educate our constituents. So a lot of what I'm going to be doing over the next year, in addition to running for re-election, is actually going out and talking to people about what these issues mean. This year, for the first time, the Senate President and the Speaker agreed to put together a bipartisan, bicameral special committee to actually study the ballot initiatives. So it's incumbent upon us, I got named to it with 2 other Democrats in the Senate, it's incumbent upon us to kind of vet these ballot initiatives and to figure out if there's a legislative proposal there that can be a compromise. We've seen it before. The grand bargain was one of those things back in 2018. So we're going to look at those issues. There's a lot that are potentially going to be on the ballot this year. They still have to go through a round of signature gathering. They've already done one. But if approved, then they have to go through another round of signature gathering. And then they're going to spend about $1 bazillion on TV ads that we always see. Every time you turn on the TV, it's yes on this, no on that. What we're going to try and do is bring them together, have a hearing, public hearing. People can see exactly what the issues are, and then at the end of the day, if there's a compromise, we're going to try and craft that. So that is that, and I want to end on this and then take any questions you may have. Biggest issue that I think we're facing in the Commonwealth, obviously we have some challenges, is housing. It's one of those things that comes up every couple of years. Everybody says, oh, we're in a housing crisis, we're in a housing crisis. We are 100% unequivocally in the housing crisis of a generation here in Massachusetts. Never forget, a few years back, Charlie Baker, our governor, had a Secretary of Economic Development and Housing that I just thought the world of, and very intelligent guy. And he was at a chamber meeting I was at, and he talked about the housing crisis in a way that, quite frankly, I never really delved into. And he talked about it, how much it affects economic development, how much it affects the business community throughout our district and throughout Massachusetts. And it was right around there where we started to see the workforce shortages that we're having across sectors. And he said these two are not unrelated. If people cannot afford to live here in Massachusetts or in regions like ours, then businesses won't have employees to be able to build what they're building, or for, in the service industry or manufacturing. We have to address the housing crisis. Governors, legislators, state senators, state representatives have been talking about this for many years, and we've yet to find a solution that actually fixes this. We need to treat this as the existential threat in Massachusetts of our time. When you think about how many young families are out there, how many people, have young kids that go off to college, and they go to school in Boston, they go out of state, they want to live back here in Norton, they want to live in Mansfield, they want to live in Foxborough. You can't afford it. You go into Zillow right now, I don't know how many, what the market looks like in Norton. In Foxborough, there were 6 houses there. Mansfield, there was maybe a dozen. All very much out of reach for a young family or students coming back. Where do they go? They move back into mom and dad's, right? Never mind, fine. I can remember growing up, they always said, you got to save that 20%. You don't want to pay PMI. If you're going to buy a house, this is what you have to do. How do you save 20% on a $900,000 home when you're, starting a family? You can't. So you're already upside down trying to do it. And then when you look for apartments, it's the same thing. You're paying a lot more than you would on a mortgage in most places. You just can't afford to live here in Massachusetts. So what happens? We get the brain drain. We got people that go to school here, and then they leave. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, whose son moved down to Tennessee. He said, could have made more money here in Massachusetts. He ended up in Tennessee because it's a lot more affordable to live. So when we talk about competitiveness in Massachusetts, housing is the problem. Again, back to not one size fits all. We've tried to pass legislation that understands the unique needs of each community. But we have to be bold about it now. And I wasn't that guy 5, 6 years ago, trust me. I have come around to the point that we have to be as bold as possible, even if it loses me votes, or if people say to me, Paul, we can't do that in this community. We have to be a part of the solution. Some communities have not done well in years past. I was looking at one community the other day who I think minimum lot size was like 5 acres. What? Right? Very well-to-do town, trust me, but I mean, that's a minimum lot size. Other communities have done well, right? Norton does exceptionally well, because I think we're in safe harbor. We're over 10% when it comes to affordability here in Norton. But we have to identify developable dirt. We have to find dirt in towns where we can actually build dense housing. That doesn't come without a cost. We know that. We have to be smart about where we zone it, but we have to be a part of that solution going forward. So housing is going to be a focus of mine over the next year, next term, if I'm lucky enough to be back in the Senate. Again, not easy to do, and we're grappling with it. Norton is an adjacent MBTA community. Many of us here in Norton know that they had to come up with a plan, and we're on track towards doing specific zoning. But I want to leave you with one thing that I think is going to be a focus of mine. It has been. Looking at that missing middle. Again, I grew up in Rosendale, JP. I used to go sledding over in George Wright Golf Course over in Hyde Park. If anybody knows, great sledding hill. I'm lucky I'm alive after sledding on that hill for so many years. But I was up in that area recently, and I've driven through a million times. But you notice all the starter homes, all those smaller starter homes, right? Remember the old Campanelli style homes, right? The post-World War II kind of revival of, this is your piece of the American dream. When was the last time we saw a starter home being built anywhere in Massachusetts? They don't build them. They don't build them. So now what do we have? We have young people that can't grow their families because there's not enough affordable, and I say affordable in quotes, affordable housing for them to actually buy a home. You have seniors that want to downsize, want to open up their home. There's nowhere for them to go in a community, right? Well, what if we said, let's get back to the days of incentivizing the growth of starter homes. So we looked at another state and what they had done. So there's two problems. Well, there's multiple problems. Number one, though, we have to incentivize the developers. If you go out and talk to a developer, are they going to develop, 1,800 square foot home on a quarter acre lot where they could build one of those McMansions in an acre lot somewhere and make a lot more ROI, return on their investment? No. So we have to incentivize them to do it. You can do that with a trust fund. The second piece is the purchaser, the buyer. Even if we are building those starter homes, those smaller, capes that people can move into, yeah, it's less money than if you're, moving into a $1 million colonial, but odds are you're probably still not at a place where it's affordable for you. Can we now subsidize those buyers? Enter into some sort of shared appreciation model where we say, look, we will help you purchase that home, build some wealth, but then when you turn around and sell that home, some of that money from the appreciation of that home goes back into the trust so that we can continue to do this. It becomes controversial when you do that because people think when they build wealth, they should be able to walk away with all of that appreciation. But ultimately, if we want to get to a place where we have a program that actually works for working people, for young people, young families, for seniors, then we have to be bold about the programs that we offer them. So that's kind of an important piece on what I'm doing. There's a housing bond bill going through the legislature right now. I spoke with the Senate chair this afternoon. Very bold bill by the governor. It's a bond bill. So, we have to be careful about kind of where our bonding cap is and how much we're actually borrowing. But that bill will be discussed at length over the next couple months. And quite frankly, I've had a conversation with the secretary and with the lieutenant governor to say I think we need to focus on kind of that missing middle and what we're doing. Yes, density. Yes, low income. Yes, public housing, which we're making an investment in a housing bond bill. Market rate, workforce housing, absolutely. But don't forget the people in the middle that need our help. So that is kind of all the things that I've been working on. A million other things. I get a couple of bills. I want to talk about drink spiking and people being involuntarily drugged. We got some money to help that because we had a young woman just up the road in Mansfield who was out at a house party. Somebody drugged her drink, right? They roofied her drink. Young woman. And she put a video on social media. And I happen to be scrolling through and there's no such thing as a coincidence. All of a sudden I see this video. And I think the title was, I'm ticked off at, I won't name the hospital, but a certain hospital. I said, well, now you got my interest. I'm kind of a healthcare nerd. Let me see what she has to say. And she talked about how the night before she got drugged, she went unconscious. She was luckily with friends who got her back to her dorm room, but she wasn't right. She was violently ill. She said, something's not right. She's gone out and had a few drinks on the weekend before. This wasn't that. She showed up to one of the biggest hospitals in the Commonwealth and said, I want to get tested. I think I got drugged last night. And after keeping her for hours, they said, sorry, if you're not here to report a rape or sexual assault, we don't do that. And she said, what? She goes, I was with friends, thank God I wasn't, but can you test me? I don't know what's in my body. And they said, yeah, we don't do that. So I saw the video, we reached out immediately. Not too long later, after we're working on a bill, group of 50-something-year-old women go to a South Shore town. They go to a restaurant. Wasn't a club, wasn't a venue, wasn't a concert. They go to a restaurant. And one of the women there had a second drink, started to feel a little woozy, walked into the restroom, all of a sudden legless, couldn't speak, gross motor skills gone, fine motor skills, forget about it. She couldn't walk. They take her home to her husband, who's a physician. Her husband's a physician, and he says, I'm taking her to the hospital. So they go over to the hospital, same thing. He said, I want you to test my wife. I think she got roofied or, there's something in the drink, ketamine, whatever it may be. And they said, yeah, sorry, we don't do that. He goes, well, how do I go to the police and start an investigation now if you don't test for that? So we found out about this and started to do a little digging and found out that wasn't a unique story. This was common. Anybody that shows up, whether you show up at the bigger hospitals or the smaller hospitals, they will not pay for a drug test if you've been drugged. So we put it out there working on a bill. I gotta tell you, very rarely do you get stopped in your tracks in this job. We had hundreds, mostly young women, hundreds of young women, 19, 20, 21, 22, 25 years old, reach out and say, let me tell you my story. Happened to me at this venue, happened to me at this venue, happened to me at this concert, happened to me here. We have a problem out there. Reach out to law enforcement. Talk to me. How do we do this? How do we go out and we catch these perpetrators that are doing this? And they say, we can't. Oftentimes they'll come to us, they don't have the proof. We don't know if somebody was just overserved. We don't know if maybe they had a drug interaction. We don't know that they were drugged because they can't produce the report from the hospital that said that they had ketamine or Rohypnol or whatever in their drinks. So we're not able to go and stop the problem because we're not testing for it. So we said, well, we're going to put a bill out and mandate that every hospital system in Massachusetts, if you're licensed, you have to test. Get a little pushback on it. Two of the biggest hospital systems said, yep, we'll change our policy, we'll test for it, and they do today currently, thank God. But the second part of that is that people shouldn't have to play hospital roulette to figure out if I'm in Attleboro, if I'm in Norton, or if I'm on the Cape, or if I'm in the Berkshires, or if I'm in Boston, then I'm going to get treated any differently than if I go into Mass General or Brigham and Women's. So we're still working this legislation. We're going to get a favorable report out of committee. We got some money for DPH to put out drink testing kits so that we can actually get them out to licensed venues, because the last thing that any of these alcohol license holders want to deal with is this happening in their venues, right? This is their business and their livelihood. So they want to work with us to make sure that the resources are there, that the training is there, and that law enforcement can actually go and catch these folks. So I wanted to bring that up because it's been a focus of mine over the last couple of years since I talked to that young woman. Tomorrow afternoon I have a conversation with another gentleman who reached out to me last week by email and said that it happened to his daughter the week before. And he was beside himself saying, I send my daughter to school, I think everything's going to be okay, and this happens to her, right? She's responsible, and all of a sudden she's drugged. So a few of the issues we're working on, a lot more to come. But again, I am blessed to have this opportunity, to have the job to talk with you all, talk with folks watching at home, and to work with such a great delegation with Rep Barrows and Rep Howard and the local officials. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot going on. I know not everybody agrees with me all the time. I actually relish that. I enjoy conversation. I enjoy debates. Ask Jay, he'll tell you. So please reach out to me if I can ever answer any questions at all, including right now, Ralph. If there's any time for questions, I'm happy to answer some.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Don't let me off too easy. Yeah.
Yep, Senator, I asked this question of people that come and visit with us.
Yeah.
We had a presentation by our superintendent of schools
Yep.
a number of months ago, and as you know, everybody's challenged on their school budgets. And one of the numbers that they brought up, or she brought up, was the percentage of dollars that go to special education.
Yes.
We all know the special education is there, but it looks like there needs to be some sort of a balance to make sure that those people non-special education are getting their due share of that budget money. A difficult situation. Just interested in your comments on that.
Yeah, it's we hear it all the time from superintendents, and Superintendent O'Neill and Superintendent Bayetta before her, and really throughout the district. Norton actually is well known. Norton has a great reputation across this region, across Massachusetts, for their work with special ed. And with that comes increased costs. We're a school choice community here in Norton. That hasn't been touched in many, many years, which Town Manager Mike Units reached out to me last week to make sure that I knew that and to start working on it. But absolutely right. When you look at the explosion of students that are on IEPs and that do fall under special education, it has grown exponentially over the years, including here in Norton. That's part of that formula that I was talking about, that Student Opportunity Act, which was an absolute game changer, and I supported it. But we have to reopen that. We have to reopen that now that we know, now that we see minimum aid communities, now that we see other towns that say, hey, we're struggling with this, and it's not sustainable for students across the board. Those costs keep increasing, and the state isn't sending any more down. So, that's one of those conversations. I think if we can reopen the Student Opportunity Act, talk about how different towns are unique, and make sure that we're actually adequately funding special education. We had to do the same thing on transportation. For many years, towns like Norton, we're losing money on transporting students when you're sending them to other district schools. And the legislature made a commitment years ago that they didn't follow through on right away. That's important to me. It's important to Jay every year that we have these budget discussions when we talk about school transportation. We should fully fund it 100%. We made a promise to communities. If they have to send students out of district, we should be paying for that. So yeah, not sustainable the way it's going. You know, hoping that we can, and we will, hoping that we can have the discussion soon on education funding. But it is not equitable, I'll tell you that.
One of the things we're struggling with in the housing is we have the front of that facility, which is the community for senior housing, where the septic system was. And we want to build by replicating what we have in the back.
Yeah.
And it's owned by the state because we sold you the land. And at a conference at Seacrest, at an attorney's conference on the wokeness, the right thing to say, he, she, whatever, I brought it up that the problem that we're having is that you just created, or there's a law on the books now that I never knew about, that says my seniors and the people in Norton and the veterans don't have the first position. The first position, if that housing is built and completed, goes to someone else who may have only been here for a very short period of time. And he said, by the way, Ralph, if you bring it up, you better be very careful how you bring it up. And I'm sitting there going, this is Ralphie. You're talking about, God, I can't go face to face with you, and you're going to give away, we're going to take that small piece of property and build up because it's exponentially cheaper, and who are you going to house? Instead of looking at someone like myself in a raised ranch, if I downsize and go into that facility where I belong, not in competition, you've opened up a house for somebody.
That's right.
That's affordable.
That's right.
Like when I bought my house. But if you veer off in your language, you're sitting on a lawsuit. I walked away.
Did the right thing.
I walked away because I bring it up because I wonder if the state, now that it has said it's a sanctioned state, has investigated that, has looked at it, or are they just using middle America, middle Norton households to pay for their mistake? And I'm sorry my voice is going up.
No, Ralph,
But-
I get it.
24 years on housing, and when you take a veteran and say you just lost your position,
Yeah.
might as well burn the flag.
Yeah.
Touching it.
Yeah, I look, Ralph, I get that, you know, you get upset, I feel it, I hear you.
And I didn't mean, it's not a trap.
No, I trust me,
It's something that's out
look
there.
at the side of me, I'm impossible to trap, trust me. You're right, in, I'll say it like this. We have not invested in public housing in Massachusetts in a long time, as a state. We have federal housing units, we have the state housing units, and we haven't done enough investing in public housing. It's part of the problem that we find ourselves in now, where many seniors that I've dealt with, and again, you talk about the calls that I get. I get a call from a fire chief recently in our district, I won't say what town, and he said, Paul, I have a senior, an individual who's living out of their car. You know, we were called a couple of times out there to do a wellness check, make sure he's all right. Had housing, worked his whole life, living out of his car. Can we get him a shower somewhere? Something simple like that. Here's somebody who worked their whole life, who does not have a home to go to, and he has a fire chief reaching out to a state senator to see if we can get him a shower. Now, we have connections, again, being professional agitators. I know who to call and say, can we get him in a couple of days a week, get him some soup, get him warmed up, get them some clothes, get them a warm jacket, and then let's take the next step and see if we can find that individual housing. It has become impossible to find public housing for people that are in a situation like that. We've all heard the migrant issue, we've all heard the shelter emergency that we're in. Again, it's not just driven by migrants. The shelter emergency existed prior to the surge in migrants, which is a problem. Because if we don't have the capacity to house people like that work their whole lives, or to house a veteran, or to house somebody who's just up against it because they lost their job and you know, had a medical bill, like to go back to what I was talking about earlier, and they're living out in their cars, we're doing something wrong. The system's broken. The housing bond bill that was filed by the governor makes a historic $1.6 billion investment into public housing. First time we've seen that in a long, long time. It's important that we do that, but that is, again, like, that's great, but that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years down the road till we realize that, right? We realize the actual development of that. So it should be the state's position to listen to people like you here in Norton to say we have availability. This is state land, we can work something out. Let's figure this out where we can then go and build. Foxborough recently had an announcement for 200 units that are going to be deed restricted to seniors. There'll be a preference for those in the community that are looking to downsize or that need a place. Yep.
Good news.
Rep. Barrow's been working 10 years. 10 years till we got to that point, right? And that's a lot of work by myself and Jay and others trying to get the infrastructure right, signalization, making sure that, you know, do you have water and sewer? If nothing perks, what are we doing? Where's the septic? Who's doing what? Right? I mean, these are all the questions that need to be answered.
Yeah.
So then you can go build. Here we are, we get into this private-public partnership, thank God, with some very generous people that saw the need to do this, 200 units. Eventually, they're going to do it in phases. But those are the types of things that municipalities are doing that the state should actually say, yeah, this is a model that we should be using elsewhere. Same thing in Norton. I remember talking to you when we were down there recently, down there last summer, right? And saying, look, this makes sense. Let's do it. Take care of our veterans, take care of the people that are in the community, and take care of the ones that are actually, like I said, living out of their cars or living in the woods someplace.
That would be a large improvement.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to that.
Of course.
I've invested 24 years on the Housing Authority, and it is my number one. I can't close my eyes when I hit my head to the pillow. It's something that's mine, and I want to take the time, if there's anybody else that want to say anything, to thank Senator Paul Feeney for coming down here.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you.